Hi, my name is Selin, and today I will present on COVID-19 and common identity. My mentors on this project were Dr. Jameson and Joan Gordills. As we all know, COVID-19 started spreading in November 2019, and it became a pandemic in March 2020. This brought along a new lifestyle with it, including social distancing, mask mandates, and lockdowns, changing how we view and navigate the social world. Inevitably, COVID-19 influenced intergroup relations. For example, about 4 in 10 Americans say it is more common for people to express racist views about people who are Asian than before COVID-19. Similarly, about 3 in 10 Americans say it is more common for people to express racist views about people who are Black than before COVID-19. As an international student, this made me think, how might the onset of the pandemic affect intergroup relations in a university between international and domestic students? Especially because the University of Rochester has a uniquely high international student population of around 30%, I was excited to pursue this question. The theories that I use to base my research on are social identity theory and self-categorization theory, which suggests that people derive a sense of self-esteem from group memberships, and they view those who belong to the same groups as them as in-group members, and those who do not belong to the same group as them as out-group members, creating intergroup prejudice towards out-group members. Building on these theories, the common in-group identity model suggests that people from different groups can recategorize themselves into a broader identity, categorizing themselves into the same common in-group model. More specifically, dual identity suggests that people can have superordinate and subordinate identities simultaneously. For example, a superordinate identity may be being American, and a subordinate identity may be being Muslim American. The outcome of social identity and self-categorization processes is intergroup prejudice, and the contact hypothesis suggests that through positive intergroup contact, intergroup prejudice and negative stereotypes may decrease. Building on these theories, the literature suggests that disaster scenarios have the potential to promote cooperation and prosocial behavior through shared identity and common fate, creating a link between onset of disaster and common identity. Additionally, intergroup bias affects who people choose to interact with, creating a link between identity and intergroup contact, which also decreases outgroup contact. And finally, intergroup contact is one of the most reliable methods of decreasing intergroup prejudice and negative stereotypes, creating a link between intergroup contact and intergroup prejudice. Building on the theories and literature, we hypothesize that the onset of COVID-19 will positively predict superordinate group identification, and superordinate identity and intergroup contact will mediate the relationship between the onset of COVID-19 and intergroup bias, warmth, and competence. When it comes to the groups in the current study, we define superordinate identity as being a U of R student, and subordinate identities based on the student's nationality, domestic versus international. We collected data in 2 waves from a total of 511 participants, of which 29% were international and 79% were domestic students, which is similar to the U of R's composition, which is around 30% international. For the first wave, we collected data before the onset of COVID-19 during November and December of 2019 from a total of 320 participants. For the second wave, we collected data after the onset of COVID-19 during March and April of 2020 from 191 participants. And to give you a sense of context, March 30th was 2 weeks after the UFR switched to remote education and students were asked to leave campus. Both these periods of data collection were similarly distanced from the finals period. We implemented our study through an online questionnaire, which was implemented through SONA, and we used multiple scales to assess the variables we were interested in. When it comes to super subordinate group identification, we tried to assess how highly students identified with their superordinate and subordinate identities. For example, we asked students how strongly they identify with other students at the U of R and how strongly they identify with other students of their in-group at the U of R. When it comes to intergroup contact, we asked students questions like, how much contact have you had with domestic students as close friends or international students as close friends? When it comes to COVID-19 attitudes, we tried to assess how severe students perceived COVID-19 to be. So the higher students scored on the scale, the less likely they were to perceive COVID-19 as a serious problem. For example, an item reads, the negative consequences of COVID-19 have been largely exaggerated. When it comes to assessing the outcomes, we used warmth and competence subscales of the stereotype content model and asked students to rate the other group's warmth and competence. For example, we asked international students to rate the following. Most domestic students are warm, or most domestic students are competent. When it comes to assessing intergroup prejudice, we designed a novel online behavioral task called the classroom bias task. So the classroom bias task has images of 2 hypothetical classrooms in which 5 members of the in-group and 5 members of the out-group are already seated, and we ask students where they would like to sit in the classroom. Here, the orange stick figures represent domestic students and blue stick figures represent international students. We use distance from out-group members as an indicator of out-group prejudice. For example, if a domestic student were to sit at seat number 1 in classroom number 1 and seat number 5 in classroom number 2, they would get the highest score on this task possible. And here, as you can see, the images are flipped because we wanted to control for front or back bias, since the literature suggests that some students have a preference to sit at the front of the class and some have a preference to sit at the back of the class. When it comes to the results, as hypothesized, superordinate identity increased after the onset of COVID-19, as you can see from the means here. When we look at zero-order correlations of our outcome variables, we can see that perceptions of the other group's warmth are highly correlated, positively correlated with superordinate identity, which is identifying as being a U of R student, and intergroup contact. When it comes to perceptions of competence of the other group, this is also correlated, positively correlated with superordinate identity, intergroup contact, and perceptions of the other group's warmth. And finally, intergroup bias, assessed by the classroom bias task, is positively correlated with subordinate identity, which is identifying with one's in-group, domestic or international, negatively correlated with intergroup contact, and perceptions of other groups' warmth and competence. Here we have a few mediation models that show that the onset of COVID-19 positively predicts superordinate identity, which positively predicts intergroup contact, which positively predicts perceptions of the other group's warmth and competence, and negatively predicts intergroup bias. And as you can see from the confidence intervals of these models, they're all significant since none of them include 0. Overall, the relationship between the onset of COVID-19 and perceptions of the other group's warmth and competence and intergroup bias is mediated by superordinate identity and intergroup contact, in line with our second hypothesis. And just to make sure that these effects were due to COVID-19, we used the COVID-19 attitude scale as a predictor and kept the models the same other than that predictor. And here you can see that the less likely a student was to take COVID-19 seriously, the less likely they were to identify with the greater student body. And similar to before, superordinate identity positively predicted intergroup contact, which positively predicted intergroup perceptions of the other group's warmth and competence, and negatively predicted intergroup bias. Once again, the confidence intervals showed us that all of these models are significant, and the relationship between COVID-19 attitudes and intergroup outcomes are mediated by superordinate identity and intergroup contact. Overall, our hypotheses were confirmed. After the onset of COVID-19, students were more likely to identify with the greater university. Additionally, higher superordinate identity predicted higher intergroup contact, which predicted higher perceptions of the other group's warmth and competence, and negatively predicted intergroup bias. Overall, the relationship between the onset of COVID-19 and intergroup outcomes was mediated by superordinate identity and intergroup contact as hypothesized. And finally, the classroom bias task was associated with numerous predictors, including subordinate identity, perceptions of warmth and competence, and intergroup contact, which is pretty exciting since this is a novel task that we designed. Overall, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic may impact how people identify with social groups. And future directions include manipulating dual identity processes through experimental design to isolate mechanisms, using more specific measures of intergroup contact to disambiguate the type of contact that occurred, and developing the classroom bias task to assess intergroup bias in different contexts. I would like to thank Dr. Jameson and John for mentoring me through the process and teaching me so much about psych research. And I would also like to say thank you to Dr. Elliott for being my second reader. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. I hope you enjoyed it.